In this video we're going to look at levels, and I'm going to try and make it as simplistic as possible. It seems to take a little while to get a feel for layers, and you might struggle with them for a while and all of a sudden it seems to come right. So let's just start. I'm going to open a picture, which happens to be a picture of a squirrel. So this is our first layer, and think of it as a page with a picture of a squirrel on it. So let's create another page, and you do that by creating a layer. So a layer is in effect a page. So if you look here, we have two layers. We have the background, which is locked, that shows that it's locked, and we have a second layer or a second sheet, which is layer 1. Now I can turn off layers by just clicking on the eye, and that will turn the layer off so that it makes it invisible. I'm going to turn that off, and you'll see I've got a page with a whole lot of grey and white blocks on them, and that indicates that the layer is transparent. So in fact we've got like a transparency, a piece of paper which is a transparency. So if I switch that on, you can obviously see the squirrel underneath the transparency. So let's draw something on this layer. I'm going to switch off the squirrel again, and I've got a sort of a pink here. So I'm going to select the brush tool. I'm going to just change it to a plain brush. Let's make it a little bit bigger, and I'm pressing now the right square brackets, which makes a brush larger. And I'm just going to do a little bit of drawing. So now I have this transparent page that I've made these red lines. If I switch on the squirrel underneath, you can see I've got the squirrel underneath and I've got these lines on top. Let's make another layer. So I click the create new layer. So on top of this I'm going to switch these ones off first, and let's change the color and make it orange. And I'm going to draw a box. Right, and I'm going to turn that layer off. So I've got, in actual fact, I've got no layers on. So let's switch on the first one, which is a page of a squirrel. The second one is the red lines, the second one is the orange lines. So we can quite easily see how we've got one page on top of the other, and we can do some interesting things so that it looks as if this is not the case. So I'm going to go to the top layer, and before we do anything I'm going to rename these layers. If I double click on layer 1, I'm going to say red lines, press enter, and I go to layer 2, double click on the name layer 2, and I'm going to say box. I'm going to make sure that the box is highlighted, and I'm going to take off some of the box. So I'm going to go to the eraser. I'm going to make sure the box layer is highlighted, and I'm just going to delete, and it might help just to get in a bit closer. So I've clicked my magnifying glass and I made a square around the area that I want to look at. I go back to my eraser and I just erase. So if you think at this stage, well, I'm not quite sure what the layer looks like underneath, I can change the opacity of layers. So I've got my box layer and I'm going to turn down the opacity. So what it means is I'm going to make it more transparent, and you can see as I go down. So I've made this top layer with the orange more see-through, and then I can much more easily take off parts of the orange layer. And I'm not going to be too fastidious about it. So that I can see everything, I press Control 0, or on the Mac Command 0. And let's turn the opacity of the box back up to 100. So now if you look at it, it looks very clever. It looks as if the red is actually on top of the orange. But if we switch off the bottom two layers, that's what we've got. I turn it on, it's actually underneath. So you can do very clever things and make layers look as if they're on top of each other or twisted, but in fact they're not. Let's switch the bottom layer back on. Now what would happen if we took the top layer and we made it completely opaque, which means we couldn't see through it. So let's switch these two layers off. We've got our orange layer. I'm going to make the background white. So if we go down to the bottom here, you'll see this little box changes the colours, the foreground and background colours, to black and white. So the foreground colour is black, and the background, if we hover over it, is white. But I want those the other way around, because the foreground colour with the brush is always what you work with. So I click on this arrow, and every time you click this arrow, it will switch the colours. So I've got it on white now. I'm going to go to my bucket, and I'm going to click in the transparent area, which will fill it all with white. Now if we switch on the areas below, you see we can't see it at all, because it's like having a page with a squirrel on it and then putting another page on top. Well, you can't see it, but we can actually make the top page more transparent again. So we change the opacity down, and you can see we can slowly but surely see what's underneath. And there are occasions when we want to do that because we don't want the top layer to be so strong. We want to be able to see through it. But let's take it back up to 100. Now I'm going to take my eraser again, and I'm going to take away some of this layer. There we go. I'm taking it away. I'm taking away the top layer so I can see some of the squirrel and some of the red. And let's go up here a bit more, and let's do some across here as well. I think I'm going to just have a bit of fun here. So if you look at this, it actually seems a bit confusing, because it doesn't, you say, well, what layer is what? And if you have problems with this, just switch the layers on and off to see what you have. So if I switch the bottom layers off, that's what I've actually got. I've got my orange, my white, and this is where I've erased the white, so we can see first of all the red through it, and then the squirrel. I'm going to turn the top two layers off. Let's look at a locked background. You can make some changes to a locked background, but not everything. What I normally do is I always make a copy of my background. So to copy a layer, it's Control J, and we're going to use this throughout the lessons. So it's a very important keystroke to remember. Make sure your layer is selected, press Control J, and it makes a copy. And now you'll see there's no lock on this copy, and you can do what you like to this layer. But there are occasions when you might want to change your original layer. I like to keep a copy, because if I make mistakes on it, I can always make another copy of my background layer and start again. But there are occasions when you don't. So I'm going to delete a layer, and the way you delete a layer is to right click and select delete layer. Asks you if you want to delete it. Yes. If I wanted to unlock this background, there's several ways that you can do it, but the easiest is to just double click on the background and just rename it. So I'm just going to put first. Okay. You'll notice now that the lock is gone. As soon as you rename the bottom layer, it unlocks. So from now on you can do what you like with that bottom layer. Let's make a copy of that bottom layer. Control J. And I want to switch the very bottom one off. Now, Let's switch these other two. Now there may be times that you want to combine all these layers together into one page. So what you're doing is you're almost getting 3 pages, and you're merging them together. So make sure that they all are visible. Make sure at least one of them is selected. I've selected the bottom one, and I go to Layer, Merge Visible. And now, if you look at my layers, I've got my squirrel at the bottom, and I have all the other layers combined. If I make any changes on this, it affects everything on this page. This has now become one page. So that's working with layers. Let's delete this top layer. Let's add another layer, and let's just put something on it. I'm going to change the colour again, and let's just put some zigzags on it. Let's create another layer, change the colour, and I'm going to put some zigzags the other way. Let's fill it in a bit. Back to purple. I'm going to go to the purple layer. You'll see it gets drawn underneath because it's the layer underneath. Now there are times when you have 3 layers, but you want to combine all the layers, but you still want to keep a copy of the 3 layers. And what you do is you hold down Shift, Control, Alt, E. And now you'll see it's combined it to one layer. If you're using a Mac, it's Shift, Command, Option, E. And now I can move the layers around any way I want to. So I'm going to take this layer, and the way I do it is click on the layer and I drag it to the top. Now that layer is on the top. Let's turn it off. Let's turn off the bottom, and we've got these 2 layers. So if I wanted the blue layer to be on top of the red layer, I click on it and I move it just above. You'll see there's a black line there now, and there we have it. So you can move your layers. I could move the squirrel right to the top and turn it on. Now you can't see anything. Or I can move it right down to the bottom. I can also select a lot of layers at the same time. So I select, for example, my top layer. I hold down the Control and I click the layers that I want to include. So I've now got 3 layers highlighted. I right click and I can delete. Asks me if I want to delete, and I say yes. Let's create another layer. So I click the new layer button, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that layer with, or some of it with black, just so that it just covers the squirrel, but in quite a sort of a rough way. I'm going to click on the squirrel underneath, and I'm going to move that to the top. On the menu bar, you actually have a layers option, and if you click it, there's all sorts of things that you can do with layers. So you can add layers here, you can delete layers, you can rename layers. So as well as doing it on the layer panel itself, you can do it here as well. But what I'm going to do is create a clipping mask. So I have my picture at the top, I have my black box at the bottom, which I want to fill with the squirrel. I go Layer, Clipping Mask. And that's a way of being able to put a picture into some sort of frame. If I undo that, let's go back. Let's switch that off. Let's go to this layer, and I'm going to change it. So let's get my razor and make sure that that layer is selected. I'm going to just delete this. I'm going to go back to my brush. I'm going to do very rough heart. Okay, I go to my top layer, I switch it on, and I go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. And what I can do at this point is I can actually move my top layer. So I make sure my top layer is selected, I go to the Move tool, and I can move the squirrel so that it's in the middle. And then if I want to, I can combine both of those layers. Layer, Merge Visible. But you'll see now that I don't have the option of getting the squirrel back again, which is why I always keep a copy of the squirrel at the bottom. So if there's anything else I want to do, I can still do it. So let's reverse that. Let's go to the Undo History at the bottom. Let's go to the brush. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy of the squirrel. Control J or Command J. Make sure the layer is selected. And I'm going to switch that off. I'm going to go to my first layer. I'm going to go Layer, Clipping Mask. I'm going to move it so I've got it in there. And then I'm going to combine it. Layer, Merge Visible. And I switch the other one on. I'm actually going to put that at the bottom. So there I have another little squirrel. And what I can do is I can actually change the size of that. Put it in the corner. And maybe I want to emphasize it. I'm going to go up to Effects. And I click on this one, apply it, close that. So now I have two layers. I have one layer with the squirrel and one layer with the heart, which I can turn on and off. And that's essentially layers.